Pretty good?
Yeah.
Take it away, Jess.
Okay. Thank you. So this presentation is going to be a little bit more of a kind of discussion. I'm going to give a bit of background before getting into discussion. This is something that Melissa and I have been working on and talking about a lot. So it's a topic that doesn't always come up a lot of the time, and you'll see what I mean later on as we go through it. But today we're going to be talking about unpacking stereotypes in Indigenous art, as well as Indigenous artist versus artist who is Indigenous. These, Melissa and I have kind of come up with that they're quite different but similar. And it's, you know, in a world of labels, we kind of have to have labels at this point. And this is just one way that we've been talking about things. So, framing the question. The first bit here is just kind of the background, right? The difference between an Indigenous artist versus an artist who is Indigenous. There is no right or wrong answer at this point. We don't actually have an answer. It's more just a philosophical question. So it's a very broad term and idea. So labels really do affect how art is received, marketed, interpreted. We see that a lot if you go to any gallery, especially in the big cities. I know when I was going to OCAD at the AGO, they had like a little wing that was, I think they honestly had it titled as like the African art or something like that.
Was that one?
Yeah. So it's these labels, but then all of the other art in the gallery were like, this is so-and-so. It's like an actual individual's name and not just a group of people. We're moving away from that, thankfully, but like, you know, that's sort of how you would see it in galleries usually. European artists in specific have had the freedom to kind of go between styles. Like we know with Picasso, there was like the blue era, there was the red era, there was all these different iterations that artists could go through. Whereas Indigenous artists tend to not quite have that freedom as of yet, or don't always have the perceived freedom, if that makes sense. Their ancestry with European artists wasn't always something that they were being judged by. Like, if we look at Picasso, he wasn't always like a Spanish artist. He was Picasso, he did Cubism, like all of the works. It was never his ancestry that was always the big pillar of his work. Yes, we still go by that, but not always. Indigenous artists, though, are often framed first and foremost by their cultural identity. We're often expected to be representatives of our communities if we are artists or in any work showing cultural background. Could be good, could be bad. It's a lot of pressure for a lot of Indigenous artists or artists who are Indigenous. Look at me going so good there.
So just to add to that, something that just came up yesterday in a conversation Chelsea and I were having about grants.
Oh,
so in Canada, there has been a push to provide further space for Indigenous voices within the arts, which I think we would all agree is a good thing. That's what we would like. But the way that's executed is sometimes problematic. So there are grants from the Canada Council for the Arts, as well as the Ontario Arts Council. But the artist needs to, first of all, self-identify as Indigenous. And as Chelsea will tell you, there's a whole history of problematic language and thought that goes behind that. And then you also are putting yourself in a different category than the rest of artists within Canada. So are you Indigenous enough, if that's even a thing? And what is the expectation if you were to receive an art, or a grant rather, that's meant for Indigenous art? Is there an expectation of what you're going to produce, that it reflects Indigenous identity?
Yeah, we had this whole discussion yesterday through text, and we're like, we're very passionate about it. Yeah, there's always these questions, and like I said, there is no right answer right now. With the weight of stereotypes, this is definitely what we were just talking about. The Indigenous art is often stereotyped as, you know, the beadwork. You'll see feathers all the time. You'll see animals, or there's like traditional symbolism. We'll get into a few different visuals. So like one of the main ones is usually woodland style art, which is popularized by Norvell Marceau. Many artists who do kind of move away from that traditional idea of Indigenous art kind of get put on the spot and not always feel Indigenous enough, or are asked to like prove their identity and things like that. Problematic, not great. We know that like colonization definitely kind of paved the way for those questions to be asked. Sucks that we're still going through this. But yeah, we're always being asked or thought of as not being Indigenous enough, or even me, like I'm mixed European and Anishinaabe. I don't often refer to myself as an Indigenous artist. I'll say that I am a mixed settler and Anishinaabe artist. I'm still learning everything. I come at it from a point of view where I'm looking at all of my ancestries and seeing if there's any similarities or differences, because I do think that what we create and what we make comes from maybe our backgrounds as well, plus the things that we've learned on top. So like in my case, am I representative of all people who are mixed, Polish, Irish, English and Anishinaabe? Do I represent those people who are mixed of that descent? That's a huge pressure. So then when we're thinking of those things, putting it in that context, it really doesn't make any sense to represent such a broad group of people. Being representative of yourself makes more sense, but you know. Like I said, we're expected to be cultural representatives. Whereas European artists were typically seen as the individual first, as I said earlier. That definitely limits the ability to experiment and just look at your art practice as a whole. We'll talk about it with one of the other artists. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, Indigenous artists or artists who are Indigenous are making their money through the arts, through markets, and if it doesn't look a certain way, it's not always going to sell, because people have the idea that it needs to look a certain way in order for it to sell, which thankfully we're breaking out of that, but we'll get there.
The same is true though for artists that work as arts educators.
Yes.
So if right now there's a large push within the school systems to include more Indigenous culture, again, wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then when they're including things like Indigenous mural artists to come to their schools, the expectation is then that you will produce something based on teachings, that it'll look like what we consider Indigenous art. So while on one hand it's well-meaning and a good thing, I'm not saying I wouldn't want my kids to learn traditional teachings, it's also not leaving space for them to be contemporary artists working. Maybe they have further concerns, other things they'd like to talk about that are still important and valuable and would be more in the right vein of honoring what it means to be an Indigenous person in 2025.
One of the things that I did when I was teaching, and specifically when I was doing my practicum, I was with a teacher who was doing, it's called the NAC course, it's Expressions in First Nations, Métis, and Inuit art. It's a newer program, pretty good, except for the fact that like in the school that I was working at, it's made to be more of like the grade 9 art, which is the essential class that you have to take. But it's more almost like a history class. It's not necessarily one where you're creating art in it, like you're studying the Indigenous art, not really making it. But yes, they framed it as grade 9 art or you're making art. So when I got there, I saw that there was a lot of like woodland style art being copied, a lot of like Christy Belcourt's work being copied as well, which is strange because we don't always, or we talk about how plagiarism is a really bad thing, but in the arts, for some reason, when we're teaching the arts to high school students, that kind of goes out the window sometimes. Because even I experienced that when I was in high school, especially in smaller towns. We don't really strive for like the individuality in that. But when I was there, I decided to create like an assignment where we talked about all my relations, which is where it's an Indigenous practice, and as not just Indigenous to Turtle Island, but a bunch of different nations across the world. Main concept is that we are related to all the beings on this land, on this earth, the animals, the fish, the water, the air, the land, the rocks, the trees, everything. Not only to those, but to each other, we are relations. So when we say all my relations, we are all relations. So I talked about that concept with the students and then asked them, when you hear that, when you think of that, after everything that I've just told you, how would you relate to that? And with that, so many of them created works that were based on family memories or locations that meant something to them and their family, or would recreate things that were gifted to them by somebody, just things that made them feel connected to other people and to other things. And I think that is kind of still bringing in that Indigenous teachings, traditional teachings, but kind of showing people that like those are core values, right? They're things that should be ingrained in us to think about all of our relations and working with people. So that was one of my ways to like make it so that it actually related to them, because some of the students, they just, I don't know, they don't always understand it, and that's okay. Like, we're in a learning process.
Well, and that grade 9 course is required.
Yes, yeah.
It's
like
not necessarily art students.
No,
who are joining it.
no. And they will tell you that. They for sure will tell you that.
But does not the supply and demand of the product create, you know, what you end up being buying? If you want to sell, then you have to make woodland.
There is definitely that sort of idea for sure. There are a lot of artists who still feel that way. There is, from what I've seen, still a demand in that. Thank you. And you do still see a lot of Indigenous artists creating in the woodland style art. It's not a bad thing by any means. That's the style that they want to be creating in and enjoy creating in. We're just talking about like, if you want to move away from that, or if you want to like express yourself as an individual artist and not just like the woodland style art. Which may not make a whole lot of sense there, but we'll kind of go through that as well. I don't know if you have anything on that.
And when you talk about commercial trends within contemporary art, because that's really what it is. I mean, it's an economy, it's a market. I think the thing that we find a little concerning, a lot concerning, is that if you are a Western contemporary artist, then the thing that is looked for is ingenuity, innovation, those kinds of things. Whereas if you're an Indigenous contemporary artist, there is often a, how does this represent your culture?
Yes.
And does it look like something that my friends will come over and they'll recognize that this was done by an Indigenous artist?
Well, there's a really excellent example of the overall creativity by a recent graduate from TDSS at the Photoshop. I think it's in the front window, quite a large piece. And you might be interested in seeing that and learning more about the artist. Quite fascinating. He self-identifies as Inuit.
Okay, cool. I'll have to check that one out. I'll make a note of that. Because I don't always go back.
Well, you just drive by it, right?
Yeah.
It's
Oh, okay.
Just quick by. Just before the lights, as you entered, you know,
Well, and I will say from my encounter with, we call them like emerging artists, so younger artists who are not as far down the professional path, they haven't experienced that pigeonholing yet.
No.
Which is a good thing, and that is hope for the future that will not be their experience.
I think that's true for you.
Yeah, it's established artists, mid-career artists.
Ones that who had to kind of make it over that hump of being termed as contemporary artists. Like in this presentation, I talk about Carl Beam, who is one of the first Indigenous artists to be classified first as a contemporary artist. And after him, everybody kind of started thinking about whether or not Indigenous art had to be classified as a certain way. I have a photo of Carl Beam's work in the presentation, but I also invite you to look at some of his other work. It doesn't necessarily look Indigenous, but there is some of those teachings and backgrounds in it as well as his own personal experience in it. Like that was one of the first times that we started to consider people of Indigenous descent to be possibly contemporary artists. And since then, it's just been working up towards it, I guess.
It's a slow shuffle.
Yes,
towards
very
progression.
slow. One of the things that I did kind of want to make a parallel to with this is European folk art. It's the art of the people. It is just the average people making work. It's rooted in their traditions, mostly rural traditions, communal life, very much considered outside of like the high art or fine art. But now there are a lot of people who do collect folk art as high art or fine arts, which is quite interesting. So it's, we're making that parallel with Indigenous art right now. Like there are a lot of people who do still collect.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Like, we know that like Indigenous people were put on reservations.
Yes.
And then white people pulled the children off of the reservations and tried to make them less Indigenous.
Mm-hmm.
And then Indigenous people have been fighting for the rights to be Indigenous.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think putting them in as you said, a cornhole or whatever, as Indigenous people coming out and doing art, do you think it's pushed upon them that, okay, we took you away from your reserve, we made you less Indigenous, now you want to be back Indigenous, so now you have to do everything Indigenous?
Very specific.
Yeah, do you think that's part of the whole that they're there is because they want to express their rights as being Indigenous, now they have to do everything traditional, like the way their ancestors did. Do you think that's how it got part of them being like that?
Speaking for myself, I can't speak for everybody else on this, but for me, because I am mixed, I'm not going to specifically choose only my Indigenous ancestry to represent. And that's kind of the case with a lot of people right now, from what I've talked about with other artists who are mixed Indigenous, who aren't full 100% as we talk about. Because that's always the question. It's, do we go back to the old ways? Do we have to go back to those ways? Back then, it wasn't necessarily considered an art that was part of survival. So when we look at like the birch bark baskets and like our clothing, all of the things like that, it wasn't an art per se. It was more of a survival thing that Europeans saw as beautiful, wanted to collect. Kind of taking it out of that context, when we look at going to galleries or museums or anything like that, and we see cultural work on the walls or behind glass or very carefully preserved, it's kind of taking the context of that piece away. Like it's no longer used in ceremony, it's no longer used how it's supposed to be. So now we see those as art pieces. But one of the things that we've talked about is, does it still hold that original meaning if it's behind the glass and not being used in the way that it was originally meant for? So when we're talking about this, it's definitely, I think, an individual thing. Like, everybody sees it a different way. Those who want to strive to be more like ancestors and be really rooted in that traditional way, fantastic. Those of us who are mixed, or those of us who are a younger generation, who are on social media, who see all the different artworks of people and getting to just see so much more, we want to experiment more. So you kind of, yeah, it's definitely a very individual person response to that. Speaking for myself, I do want to honor my different ancestries. I don't want to just focus on my Indigenous ancestry. I have found that there's actually a lot of similarities in terms of connection to the land. Further back in history you go. And I try to honor those parts, but that's just me. I don't know how other people are always presenting or thinking, but yeah, I think that there is a push to want to go back to a certain way, but it may not be Indigenous folks themselves who are putting
Allowing
that
them
push.
to
Yeah, like
express
it's
themselves.
yeah, it's more so not necessarily just non-Indigenous people. Non-Indigenous people are kind of putting that pinhole in of like, you have to look a certain way, or you have to do this, or you
So
have
let
to
me
do
go one
that.
step further.
Yes. Yeah. She's like, let me go.
No. I would say that I think the creation of reserves, the use of residential schools as a way of taking, quote unquote, the Indian out of the child, those are systems of control. When we see Indigenous art being institutionalized, so you can show your art in a museum or a gallery if it looks like what we say Indigenous art is. And when I say those people are saying that, it's not Indigenous artists saying that. It's the people that control these spaces, which are often Western settlers. I think it's a little bit just another system of control. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that that's everywhere, certainly not at the gallery. But when that traditionally has happened, or when we do unfortunately still sometimes see that happening, like with the granting streams even, while the intention might be good, you're in fact not giving, it's about giving up the power to say what somebody else is doing. Do you know what I mean?
It's very narrow-minded thinking.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
and I think, because it makes the world a comfortable place to say, okay, I understand what that is, and that's this label, you're not giving the space for the person to be self-determining. And that's really what...
That's definitely,
Really
like, putting
looking
things
for.
into boxes is sort of how we're still seeing things a lot right now. Even, like, the artwork that we're seeing from Indigenous folks, even our regalia right now, is incredibly colorful. There's beadwork that is just so beautiful, but that all actually came from trades with Europeans. So if we went back to traditional ways, we wouldn't have that sort of color in the same sense. We wouldn't have the vibrant colors that we're seeing in Natalie King's work right now. They aren't natural colors. As somebody who makes paint and works with natural dyes and everything, I know that you can't always get these colors.
Oranges.
Yeah, no,
Oranges
I
in
mean,
the natural world.
you could maybe, not my green.
50 shades of beige.
Yeah, definitely lots of beiges, lots of browns in this area.
But in general, all the labeling that takes place gets away from the family of everything from the rocks, all the people, all the things. And when you go to the definition, say, of the word Polish, well, if you take Western Ukraine, which is where my ancestry comes from, it has been steamrolled by all kinds of civilizations over time. I went to family reunion once, and in the one family, brothers and sisters had like Mongol looks, and some blonde, blue-eyed, the others, these are brothers and sisters from this identical same family. So to try and put any label is is really ridiculous. And I think cause I'm with the school board, and we have a real problem with the word self-identification as Indigenous. And we have people, well, trustees who've been on our, student trustees who've been on our board, who definitely are Indigenous, but have no documentation whatsoever. They do not carry a card, they don't have a card, their band just never did get, up in Kirkland Lake, did never get that position. So it's really difficult, and I think if we increasingly dispense with that and go to the individual, we're all going to be better off, and hopefully that's taught in grade 9. I hope.
It all depends on the teacher.
That's right.
And the system that's in place.
And what the system allows and everything. And what we're talking about with that, like even just the status card itself, that is not Indigenous. That is a colonial concept. We are the only people who have to carry a card to prove what we are. It's not like if you are Polish descent or Scottish or Irish that you have to carry a card and be like, yeah, I'm Scottish, 3rd generation or whatever. Like,
The Canadian government told me I was.
Yes,
is really
the
what it
Canadian
comes down
government
to.
told me that this is what I am, and it has been proven.
But true, but then if you're Ukrainian, at the opening of World War I, you were put in a concentration camp in Canada because you were considered to be Austrian, which was an enemy.
Yes.
And my grandfather was actually a military leader in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, even though he was ethnically Ukrainian and refused to take a police job in 1899, came to Canada instead. You know, so he was identified as being an enemy alien. So again, the labels are really very self-destructive.
Yeah, and I think the goal has to be, I think you're right, is to let people just be, but at the same time making sure that everyone has the same access to having a voice.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when we say, well, we'll just do away with labels, then everybody will be okay. Well, no, because some of the other systems that, you know, knowingly or unknowingly control our daily lives, they still exist. So they still don't give Indigenous students, say, the same access to things.
Yeah.
Or, you know, clean drinking water, which we know has been a problem for ages, those kinds of things. So it's a very muddy, very difficult thing.
It's almost as if we have to get to somewhat near equal level or similar level before we can
Do away with the
labels completely. Because as of right now, it's still a power dynamic that is not in favor of those who are non-Indigenous or non-white, which is a really unfortunate thing and hard for a lot of people to grasp and understand. But like, if you don't have friends or family, or you yourself are anything other than white, then you're not really going to get that same understanding, if that makes sense. I don't know. But yeah, we need to kind of level out things before we can completely do away with labels, I think. That thought might change in a bit. I don't know. I'm still learning everything. But yeah. So key difference here is that Europeans were eventually able to escape the folk art label. They were able to explore in different styles such as Impressionism, Cubism, Surrealism, all of the works. Whereas Indigenous artists are kind of still boxed into that idea of folk or traditional. It's probably going to take a long time, unfortunately, just as it did for Europeans. I think that we're kind of, you know, we're however many years behind, essentially.
Seeing the box there makes me wonder whether you shouldn't consider putting together a show of collections of Indigenous art here. Like, you know, I could bring you my 2 boxes that I have from 1990s by an old veteran, and maybe we do all as a community contribute to a great show of stuff that we've all collected.
So as a gallery professional and a museum professional, I love to have community shows. I love them. The thing that comes up is that you want to present things that you know the history of, you have provenance from. So one example is when I became the curator here, we had masks that were identified as being from the 6 Nations that were here. And I said, oh, how did these get here? And it was one of those stories that was passed down through the memory of various directors, you know, oh, there was a professor who was really, had some relationship with the gallery, and he donated these masks, so that we would have representation of Indigenous culture. Okay, so the intention, again, was well-meaning, but the masks had no provenance. We didn't know what they were used for, whether they were ceremonial, whether they were gifted, whether they were taken under duress. I don't know where they came from. So I got in touch. So my t-shirt is from Woodland Cultural Center, where I worked with the very excellent Patricia Denman, who unfortunately has passed on. But we had worked together with the Benjamin Chichi exhibition, and I said, Patricia, I have these things, but I don't feel right about keeping them, A, because they're not from Indigenous communities that are local to Northern Ontario, and B, we really don't know anything about them. So it's not good practice to show things that may have other cultural contexts that we don't understand. So Patricia was very kind when I went down to see her. She took them, we packed them up carefully and respectfully and all these things, and she opened them, she said, okay, Melissa, these are things that they sell to white people. they're tourist souvenirs. And I was like, okay. She's like, but I agree with you that they don't make sense within your collecting mandate, which we have, and we'll help you dispose of them for more or less, okay, thank you, Patricia. But I mean, it's going back to the experts, right, to make sure. So while the exhibition would be fabulous, and I'm not saying I don't want to do it, it would be years of research.
Yeah.
We would want to make sure that we have that background, that context information. Just like Chelsea was saying, when ceremonial items are on display, are you disconnecting them from their actual intended meaning in the world? We do that sometimes with other things, if you look at mummies that are held in the ROM and that kind of thing. So it's very much an ongoing conversation within the arts and culture.
There's definitely a push to return items back to communities so that they can have their original meaning brought back to them. But then there's also the argument that people always have about how do we preserve that history
And make it accessible.
and make it accessible to people. One of the things that we've talked about is anytime that there is a cultural specific show or exhibition or anything like that, there should be somebody from that culture or that community as part of the curation and development of it. That way it's as authentic as it possibly can be. Maybe more people together as a panel would be best, that we're having different perspectives and we're making sure that we're doing things in a good way. We're working towards that. I think a lot of galleries and a lot of museums are starting to recognize that and see that, and they're trying. They're making their way to be more inclusive, and yeah.
Well, it is part of a broader conversation about reconciliation. So we know Truth and Reconciliation Day is coming up on the 30th.
10 years.
Sorry?
10 years.
10 years, yeah. And so the Temiskaming Art Gallery will be closed. Our staff uses that day to reflect. We have different materials we look at and that kind of thing. But when we talk about truth and reconciliation, the truth is that there's not, while we would like to say, okay, I'm going to do step A, step B, step C, and then we are reconciled and things are good. That is not the way it works. And it is often messy and difficult, and we have to be comfortable sitting with being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of humility in it, and that's one of the teachings that I really hold true. I think that having the humility to ask the questions and be okay with being quote unquote wrong or anything like that, that's what matters the absolute most. No, where's
I was trying to help it.
Oh no!
Okay, all right, I'll stay out of it.
Yeah, it's having humility to ask the questions, to be open to being called in rather than called out, and just knowing that you don't know everything and that everybody has different opinions and different thoughts, and
Exactly.
just having a conversation
A lot of
like
times
this
when you
really
ask
helps.
a question, people are like, oh, that's rude, or that's inappropriate. It's like, how do you learn? You
But
don't
that's,
ask-
that is the exact spirit of this program, right?
Yeah.
New Horizons here, Further Steps Towards Reconciliation, is to make a safe space, to ask the questions you're not sure, you don't want to come off as racist, you don't want to be seen as ignorant, this is the safe space to explore those things, for sure.
Yeah, we want to make sure that like you feel comfortable to ask the questions, or if you want extra research or other things. Like my goal for this year, this part of the part 2, is to be sending out additional resources afterwards, after our sessions, that are either from the hosts or things that we've discussed in the session that I've further gone away with and done the research for, just that you have access to it if you want to continue that learning outside of these sessions, and then you have access to things. And I think that really just makes it more accessible, like more opens it up for people, for sure. So the next few slides are going to be just a few different Indigenous artists or artists who are Indigenous. Of course, I'm starting with Norval Morrisseau because this is the one that many people associate with Indigenous art. Norval Morrisseau was an Anishinaabe artist. He is known as the father of the woodland school. Like this is his style, this is what, he's created. So he talks a lot about Anishinaabe cosmologies. I think they're all done on canvas, or some of them are done on wood.
Yep, some are on canvas, some are on wood, some are on canvas that's unstretched.
Yeah. Very iconic work, very recognizable. Then also kind of set up this expectation that Indigenous art should look a certain way, and many institutions kind of took this and put it into a category, so a box. So then now, this is actually one of the paintings that I remember pulling out of the one of the high school closets that a student just completely remade. There's some art in the past that if you copy the great masters' works, you learn from them. Still a bit of plagiarism, so I've got to kind of like think about that in terms of the arts, because that's a gray area for some people.
It's a long tradition in art history, though.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then Benjamin Chichi, I figured I'd let you talk about this because you know way more than I do.
So Benjamin Chichi was originally from Tamagami. He is our hometown hero, for lack of a better word. Benjamin Chichi was good friends with Hugh Mackenzie, who is still with us. Hugh and Benji, as he's known, basically hit their fame when they were invited to take part of Expo 67. So Expo 67 was meant to be a showcase of all things Canadian, and someone along the committee line said, hey, we should really have some Indigenous artists, and that at first had good uptake. However, Hugh will tell you that they sort of got relegated to painting the side of a water tower. So unfortunately, while I think the initial idea was good that they would be included in pavilions, what happened instead, and that was following on the success of Norval Morrisseau, is they sort of became landscape painters. However, Hugh will tell you that for him, he personally felt that this was a good turn in his career. It did mean that he was receiving commissions after this. They became good friends with Ernie Bees, who was working for what was then called the Department of Indian Affairs. And within that department, they set up a project where they worked with certain Indigenous artists who would produce work, and they would find a market for it. So Ernie lived in Ottawa, and so did Benji and Hugh for quite some time, a decade, where Hugh and Benji were producing work, what Chichi would describe as the bread and butter work. So things that you would instantly recognize as Indigenous, like this beautiful piece, Autumn Flight. So Benji would produce this for the Department of Indian Affairs to sell, and that would support their lifestyle. And then in his sort of spare time, he created things that were way more modern, following European trends, exploring abstract work, also very beautiful, still incorporating a lot of his own style. So He worked with things like stencils and these very strong lines, and you see that in his modern art as well. But these are the things that Chi-Chi described himself as the bread and butter work. He also said, there's a beautiful CBC interview, which I think is still available on our website, because Tag did do a retrospective of his work in 2018. And in the CBC interview, he says, the interviewer is asking him about being an Indigenous artist at this time. And he says, well, I don't really want to be known as an Indian artist. I'm just an artist. So Chi-Chi was already dealing with this idea that really he was a modern artist and this was something that was being put on him. But in a very practical way, he had a rent to pay and food to buy. So he needed to produce art that had a ready market for it.
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, Chi-Chi's life was cut short, and so we don't know what he'd be producing now. But the promise that he showed in those, it was about a decade really, where he was painting professionally, were just incredible. The things that he produced, the caliber of his work, for someone who did not attend traditional art school, he was really an incredible artist.
Even when I was putting together this presentation, when I Googled his name to find a specific art to put up there, these are the only styles that really come up in Google, so you don't really see any of the more modern or contemporary work that he's done, which is quite interesting.
It is, and Benjamin Chi-Chi actually made the most reproduced image in Canada. So he did a painting called Friends.
Oh, I should have posted that. Dang.
That's okay. I even have a cup of it at home.
Yeah.
And it is sold in gift shops across the land. I've even been in Europe and seen this merchandise. So it's three little geese kind of together, similar style, but they're seen frontal.
I like standing.
Yes, and it is the most reproduced image in Canada. I have seen it in the Victoria gift shop, everywhere, and I'm sure that you would recognize it if you saw it. But did Benjamin Chi-Chi ever get rich from it? Of course not. And also, it's interesting that we've sort of really picked that. I mean, it's a beautiful painting, no doubt, but it's not my favorite Benjamin Chi-Chi painting by any means. Yeah.
That's quite interesting.
And it is Chi-Chi would tell you, that is a bread and butter painting. That is not a contemporary artist.
Yeah.
Chi-Chi painting.
Yeah, that's Benjamin Chi-Chi. Then Carl Beam. This is where we start breaking into contemporary art. In 1986, he became the first Indigenous artist collected by the National Art Gallery of Canada as a contemporary artist, which is so awesome. He did multimedia works. He blended photography, history, critique of colonialism. He also liked painting. His daughter, Nog Beam, is the one who has Beam Paints on Manitoulin Island. I got to hear her talk about her life with her father and like the early days of kind of, I guess, like the origin of Beam Paints, where they would go out on the land and work with pigments and learn about pigments. Now she uses not mostly ones from the land, but that she goes forges. She goes purchases bulk amounts of it, which is incredible. But yeah, they discussed the early days of making paint. But in his work, yeah, he brings in photography. They're kind of collage-like in a sense, with the different mediums coming up. And yeah, a huge critique on colonialism. When I went to OCAD, some of his work was up at the AGO, and I actually had no idea who he was at first. Going into an art school, while being from here, not really getting much arts background, you know nothing. Sorry. So I got to see his work, and I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. I know some of these images, and then I went out afterwards and learned a lot more. I'm like, oh my god, I got to see this guy's art in person. That's wild. But yeah, this became a turning point in Indigenous art. It could be finally recognized as moving towards or going into the contemporary movement.
And again, sort of a local connection. Carl Bean was from
Yes.
Sudbury, Manitoulin
Mhm.
area,
Mhm.
as well as his wife Anne Bean, who is also a successful.
Yes. Then I wanted to bring in Christy Belcourt as well for this. I'm kind of just giving you like a general, more of the big names, just so you get a sense of all of the different artists. Christy is Métis. She uses beadwork inspired floral motifs. She does it on canvas usually. These paintings are also massive.
And made up of
Little tiny
points.
dots, like itty bitty. Very much so, like it's one individual bead, but it's a bead of paint. So she kind of talks about, like she still has the traditional Métis teachings, but then brings in very much political and environmental themes in her work. Not only does she do this sort of style, but she's done installation pieces. She has done a lot of protest posters that are more, what is that sort of called? Oh my gosh.
Like street art?
Yeah, yeah, more street art-esque. Very much a broad range of works, but all very much so political and thinking about environment. She shows that like those ideas of traditional and contemporary, more modern ideas, or like our political ideas, can really come together as one. It doesn't have to be two separate identities. If anybody has on Instagram, I suggest following her because she sometimes posts stories of her doing like the individual dots, and it is just wild. I could not imagine sitting there hunched over for hours on end just doing.
And to give you an idea, this is the piece from the National Gallery.
Yes.
And it is, you know, the size of this wall.
Yeah.
Like it's massive, it's overwhelmingly huge to consider the amount of patience and work that goes
Mhm.
into it. It's
Mhm.
incredible. Yeah.
I, years ago, saw, I don't know where I saw it, but it was a clip of a elder crying about Christie's work, about how she had taken beadwork, and she showed like a slipper with her beadwork, and how this woman had taken beadwork, traditional beadwork, and turned it into this, and she was crying. It was so moving. I've always loved her stuff.
I believe it. When I saw this piece, I also cried.
Yeah.
Because when you see it, scale really influences how we interact and understand
Yes.
art. And when you see it and you realize the dedication that was put into making this piece for you to see, and it looks, when you see it like this, it looks like it's sort of a mirror image on either side, which she's done on purpose, but then you start looking for the Easter eggs.
And I didn't realize until you said how big it was, though. I
Yeah.
had no idea.
Oh, yes.
Oh yeah,
I
they are
was talking
massive.
about that it was based on beadwork and how moved she was, but I had no idea how huge, and that it was done by dots.
Mhm.
Little tiny dots. So
Little
if you know
itty bitty.
if you know the work of Cal Knight, who's
Yes.
local here, and how long it takes him to produce a piece that might be, 3x4, whatever, you can only imagine. And the design that Christy has put into it, where it does look like it's a mirror image, but it's not. And when you start seeing what's different between the two things, that's really, really where the power of the message comes in.
And everything kind of has its own space as well to move and grow. Like even, where's my specific spot that I'm looking at? Like here, these aren't perfectly symmetrical. There's also, little Easter eggs everywhere. She's got the roots that connect things. Like it's just bringing in very much so the all my relations idea. She's actually one of the artists that I usually show students and kind of have them understand that everything is kind of interconnected. And you can, I feel like you get a sense of that in her work. And then we have Ken Monkman. This one is one that not a lot of people know of around here, from my have to tell you so many things. Kent Monkman is a contemporary Indigenous artist. He is Cree, and he's known for these large-scale paintings, based in the European history sort of style. He has an alter ego named Miss Chief Eagle Testicle, which is a play on words, and it's mischief egotistical. So there's a little bit of a play on that when you're thinking about more European history style paintings. Yeah, so he reclaims and reimagines colonial narratives. Shows how Indigenous artists can adopt the more Western art languages while turning them back against colonial histories. If you look at any of his work, this alter ego, very much so. I tried very hard to find something that wasn't like too shocking.
But, you know, good for him.
It's very,
Like, it takes you in and you have to look at it.
yes.
Like, you can't look away.
With many European history style paintings like this, there's often those like little, like the longer you look at it, the more that you see, especially because they're such big paintings, you get fully immersed into it, and that's what he does with his work as well, except that it's not like the European history, it's Indigenous history, but painted quite differently.
I think there's one where, you know, the historically inaccurate, really offensive style that involved Europeans coming to North America and all these naked people just being around,
Yes.
giving their bodies over to the Europeans.
Mhm.
And he's done a twist on that one that is,
I know. I
So
seriously
Kent Monkman-
suggest to go look at his stuff.
And he currently has a solo exhibition in Montreal right now, which means that you can access a lot of these things online. I mean, you could go to Montreal, and that would be wonderful.
I mean, a trip.
Yes. And that would be a New Horizons for a trip. But he does currently have a solo exhibition there right now. It's interesting because he's actually become very successful within the United States. He's had shows in New York, at the MoMA, things like that. And as an art historian, I sort of reflect on, okay, why is that? I don't know if it's because he's an Indigenous person from Canada, and so that feels like less a criticism of the United States, although,
yeah.
I mean, I don't think that's true, but he's also a large personality. So Kent Monkman is a showman, and so he takes the attention and runs with it, for sure, and that has helped push his agenda of spreading this message, right?
Yeah, I chose the like least shocking of his paintings. But seriously, go check out his work and see what he does and the narratives that he creates in his work. They're just, if you see them in person too, you really do get lost in them. There's just so many little things to look at. I'll find one of them later on, but there's like little shadow people in one of his paintings. There's so much to see and like so many little details.
And Kent Monkman does have an education in art history, so you do see a lot of things that call back to earlier things. He incorporates details that sort of reference other paintings within art history and that kind of thing. So it's a very rich narrative in that way. Lots to see.
Absolutely. And then this is kind of like where we're wrapping up a little bit more. Those are our main artists that we see often in the art world. But then we get into like a really gray area, and this is artists who are mixed Indigenous or of mixed ancestry. Thinking of Christy Belcourt, she is mixed as well, but she has created this safe space for her to be Métis and like work within Métis works. But then you also see like Rebecca Elmore, who creates installations, which, I mean, installations for some people, takes a little bit more effort to understand, and you know, I get it.
It's not everyone's
It's not
jam.
everybody's thing. But sometimes it's hard to see those connections if you don't know the background of that piece that she's created. Again, for people who are mixed ancestry, do we have to perform indigeneity to be recognized? This is something that I think of every single day.
I think it's interesting you're talking about this. I just read an article by pt2, and she was talking about, as somebody in performing arts, how so often it's, oh, we need an Indigenous woman, let's call, these people.
Yes.
And so she was just in this article talking about looking for bigger projects that don't, she's not trying to deny her Indigenous heritage, but where it's not about her Indigenous heritage. And I would say that in terms of the arts, the visual arts, that is very much the same problem in the performing arts, the music. It doesn't matter what the genre of art is. It seems to be, oh, we need to put a check mark on a box, as opposed to we want this really valuable artist who we respect and admire, and we want that voice to be part of this because we really we think they're magnificent and they deserve to be recognized. And the check mark on the box should be irrelevant as far as where did they come from, except that we haven't achieved that equality.
Well, and the thing is, so especially in performing arts, we see this often with TV and movies. So while it doesn't matter necessarily, we want it not to matter, when we have people that are not from a certain descent performing as someone who is, and we see that, I mean, there was a wide time in TV and movies where Mexican actors could be representing someone Indigenous from Canada, and you know, as long as you were kind of the right shade, that was good enough. And we know that's not.
Any olive skin complexion would do. And that is horrific. But it's also something where an artist should not be confined to only playing Indigenous roles.
Absolutely.
Definitely we see that all the time.
Woman on the subway could be any ethnicity. Doesn't matter.
We see that all the time, and just not recently, a while ago, thinking of oh my god, why am I blanking? Buffy Savery, holy. This identity that she created and believed, and then to be later called out so kind of horrifically, like there's a lot of different opinions on it, but somebody who held a persona for so long to then have it just ripped away, and then now a bunch of Indigenous folks who idolize Buffy Sainte-Marie are kind of reeling from that, like that was somebody who we saw as Indigenous, who was a icon, somebody that we could look up to,
And a champion.
than to have that identity be ripped away. That, like, there's harm in somebody being non-Indigenous but portraying somebody who is Indigenous, and I think of like Cher and was it Tim McGraw too, who did it for a while, or just a bunch.
She's 1/16.
You always hear those sorts of comments, like I'm 1/16 this, or my great grandmother was a Cherokee princess, which that's not real, that's not a thing.
But in the case of Buffy Sainte-Marie, this is, like, it's such a big, complex conversation, because we know that's a false identity now, but what do we do with the good that came from having her be a public figure that was, identifying as
Paved the
Indigenous?
way for Indigenous people. It's an incredibly complex conversation, and it's a messy one.
Which is the message for today.
Everything is messy.
But I mean, that's human existence, right?
Absolutely.
Just like anyone's identity is not one thing. We know that. We're complex beings. So are the systems that we actually live in.
Yeah, absolutely.
That also speaks to the danger of putting all of your cards on individuals, on personalities. artist say, and, you know, you're worshiping the artist as opposed to the higher self that can reside within.
Yeah, like the icon, yeah.
The cult of the
yeah,
artist.
the comment that you make about performing artists and musicians and everything, that was one of the things that I was going to mention, because we always think of like Indigenous music, a lot of people just think of like powwow music. But then there's artists like the Snotty Nose Res Kids who are rappers, kind of humorous in some of their lyrics and everything. But then there's also the band who did, oh my god, Come and Get Your Love. I'll remember that one.
Right.
Everyone knows the song. That's
Yeah.
all that matters.
That's all that matters. But they were an Indigenous band as well, and not a lot of people knew that they were Indigenous. And it wasn't until like Reservation Dogs that people realized that that was an Indigenous band, because they talk about like how it's their snagging anthem, which is absolutely awesome. If you also haven't seen Reservation Dogs, I suggest watching that. I was going to make a comment on like comparing European art histories, but we've kind of talked about that. It's just Europeans were allowed to move between different styles of movements. Maybe we'll get that here. I don't know.
So can you
Unless
pause for a
everything-
second?
yeah.
Because I've been thinking about something. When we talk about Western art histories, so things like the Renaissance, we're talking about a style in a time period, in a place. And that's often what we don't do when we talk about Indigenous art in Canada. So I think sometimes, as curators, as people talking about art, thinking about art, we fail to recognize that there's a complexity within Indigenous communities within Canada. There are how many communities?
Oh my gosh.
Sorry,
500 and
26? 62?
62 or 26.
Over
something
500
like that,
communities.
One or the other.
Right? And these things are highly individualized. While there can be commonalities.
Even
between
in
communities.
language, like dialects between communities, so even the people who speak Anishinaabe-Moan from an area here to Sudbury, there's slightly different dialects in that, and they're only 3 hours apart. So, yeah, huge differences between communities. Similarities, yes, but there are different ways of doing things.
And so when we talk about art history, when we speak about the Renaissance, which is something I'd done in my grad studies, I mean, it's broken down by the city, the differences, and you explore the differences that were, because there are differences based on, you know, who are the players in the city, or the patrons, the politics, the language spoken there, all of these things. And we haven't quite gotten that way when we speak about Indigenous art, particularly in Canada, because that's what kind of we're concerned with.
Yeah.
But it is something to keep in mind, right? Like it's almost like saying Indigenous art looks like Natalie King's work in Canada. Well, that is true. This is an example of Indigenous art in Canada. But it's like the same thing as saying the group of 7 is what Canadian art looks like. Well, thankfully, that's not the only edition of Canadian art. While I love the group of 7, that is one example, right? And we know that as we move across time and geographical location, all of those things, it changes what Canadian art would look like.
And even I'm thinking about if we look at Emily Carr and how she painted totem poles, it created, though it was great that she was trying to preserve history, she was looking at it from a non-Indigenous point of view. And then when her artwork went around and toured, all of a sudden there was this notion or idea that totem poles belong to all Indigenous communities. But totem poles were mostly like a Pacific Northwest practice. So even around here, we'll see some folks who do totem poles. It's kind of something that is called pan-Indianism, where it's all Indigenous people are the same. That's the concept. But it's not. There's highly individual things. But with colonization, a lot of our teachings, a lot of our knowledge has been lost. So a lot of folks who are Indigenous but don't know much about their background, they'll kind of start with that like pan-Indianism until they learn a little bit more about their individual family. So So like, you know, good and bad, we're learning, it's getting there.
As long as we keep trying to learn.
We're trying. And then, yeah, just our last bit here is just, again, talking about the burden of representation. For me, speaking for myself, I feel like I cannot be a representative of my community. I am a member of Atikameksheng and Anishinaabe First Nation in Naughton, Ontario, around Sudbury, but I was born and raised in Englehart. That's all I've ever known. So I don't feel like I can be a representative of Atikameksheng. That's, though I am a part of that community, I don't have ties to it in the same sense that people who lived in Atikameksheng or even Sudbury area are representative. I talk about this quite openly in a lot of my work, and I talk about more so a relation to land and to ancestry and learning from our relatives, and not just like our families, but our like plant relatives and everything. I look at those and try to help people to find that connection as well, because you know we're losing a connection to the land. We're constantly on our phones, and we're away from slower living and not as connected. Though you know we're the most connected we've ever been through a screen, but not through real connection. So I kind of explore humanness, I guess, in my work and ways of connection. So Melissa and I talked yesterday about folklore and how that connects people through generations. So for me, that's what interests me, is the connection through people, and I look at it from my different ancestries. I'm not trying to be a representative of all Indigenous people with that. I'm not trying to be a representative of all Polish people with that, or Scottish, or English. Like that's not my mission, my goal, or anything. I just want to have people think about things and consider where they're from and what connections they have. And I think that's a really important thing.
But then again, Indigenous people are
Expected, yes.
whereas I am Polish and German on my mom's side, French and Irish on my dad. Nobody says, well, where's your history? Don't bring it up. Like, I don't speak Polish, I don't speak German. Like,
Nobody's
but-
looking at your art and saying, so what kind of Polish?
What part?
But, you know?
One of the things that my professor said to me while I was at OCAD, her name was Tanis Nelson, was when you claim indigeneity, or when people know that you are Indigenous, you all of a sudden become a representation, and your work is political. There's no real way around that. If you're making comments, and yeah, just because you are Indigenous, it kind of becomes something that you weren't really intentionally meaning for it to.
And while some
Yeah.
art is political,
Yes, absolutely.
to take away the option to not make it be political is kind of the problem, right? When we're talking about giving space for voices and that kind of thing. That being said, there's a whole other conversation, which we won't have today, about how once the art piece leaves the hand of the artist, I'm a strong believer that objects have a life, and you can't, as the creator, just like if you were to have your own children, you can't control the things that happen to that art piece, how people are reading it from the context in which they're in, or how they understand the context in which you created it. You know, art history is really a living study where our reading of artworks changes as we learn more or different things.
And that goes to history as well. It's not just art history. As we learn and as we are brought in with different perspectives, it's living. We are still continuously learning more about it, as we know with residential schools and how people didn't know that history. It's a continuous thing, and art and history can't really be separated because it's the people at the time creating the work. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
I just want to hit the fact that there's a great display of secret, I would say, because we're in danger of having them being vandalized, what we call Indian rock paintings of red ochre all through this region. And we don't tell each other about them because there is a danger of vandalism. And then you contrast that with, which is red ochre mostly, you contrast that with Petroglyphs Provincial Park,
Yes.
which I had, looking at the age, this is the time of year to go there because there are not many people. You go in the dome and you'll be the only person there. And you'll have a local Indigenous person walk you through and explain things that he does not have time to do in the middle of summer. It's really worth getting to. I get goosebumps just thinking about it.
And so that's a whole other thing, right?
Yes.
The sort of, we want people to know and experience these things, but are we putting them in danger? I mean, this is the story of archaeology throughout time. But also, if it's like at the Petroglyph Provincial Park, it was a sacred space. So now, you know, or
Yes,
if we're
it's still
coming
that
in,
context,
does it still have that energy and that power? The same, although it's different, can be said to on tours of churches.
Yes, yeah.
Those kinds of things, or even the Sistine Chapel, if anyone's had a chance. I've never been, but you know, you go in there and it's a very tiny little room and you experience it, but just the fact you're there is actually contributing to its destruction eventually because of the gases you're emitting when you breathe out. So, and we see this as well in Venice.
I was gonna say Venice itself.
The whole city
They're
is
starting to limit tourists because they need to protect the city.
Yeah, because the tourism that comes with wanting to see those amazing art historical sites and artworks is literally destroying not just those pieces, but the whole city itself.
During COVID, I got into a podcast called All My Relations Podcast, and they did, I think it was a 3-part episode on Hawaii. And one of them was on the dangers of tourism, actually, and how during COVID, the land started to regenerate and animals that weren't in specific areas started to come back. The land was the healthiest that it had been.
And the same is
in
true
a
of
long-
Venice.
And the same is true with Venice. Like all of these, so is tourism helping? Is tourism not? It's great for money, but is it great for the longevity of things?
Well, the cultural awareness,
and
right?
yeah.
Who has the right to visit?
Yes, yes.
But you also have I just recently was reading about the issue with respect to Palestine, and in particular Gaza. You know, Gaza's archaeology and art is absolutely being destroyed. Like there's a museum, and all of a sudden the whole building is on top of it because they destroyed the building. But it happens to be a collection in France that belongs back, and it's not going back. You know, the whole preservation aspect of having things from the Parthenon in England.
That's where I was going to, the elephant marbles.
And England won't release it. Well, maybe it's very good it has released it because it got blown up.
But the decision is always who gets to decide.
Yes.
Conqueror.
Exactly.
The winners.
Because the people that steal it get to decide.
Exactly. And we see that as well with Napoleon. Napoleon sacked a whole bunch of, I mean, that's why the Louvre is full of artwork, basically. But some of those places later, through wars and all these things, and that's why when I talk about objects having a life, that's what I mean. And so are we, as curators and museum professionals, are we fixed on these things surviving forever? Or is there more value in having them in place where they, within their larger context? Imagine if they were to move the pyramids in Egypt. Would experiencing them feel the same? Would it give you that same experience if they were, say, you know, in Saskatchewan because it's safer? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it is a huge conversation within museums and galleries and archaeology.
But you also didn't hit the whole concept of forgeries, which is what more so stuff has done, the whole forgery aspect. And when I was in probably early 90s, we were paddling to see some of these petroglyphs and so on in this region here. We got onto Lake Babaca, and Kathy Hackler was with us at that time, and there's an island, and all of a sudden there's a recent creation on that island with somebody with a chisel. And chiseling away on the rock. Now, that was 1990. Now that's going to have lichens and moss all over it, and will be assumed to have been original. But I know it was I don't know who did it. No one knows who did it because I reported it right away when we came off the trip. But has anything been done about preserving, identifying? Whereas when at the Maple Mountain, there's a fire tower there. And so when people went there, locals I think, and to remember their mother, they took spray cans of paint and painted all over the rock there. Well, the solution by the Ministry of Natural Resources was to take a heavier paint and paint over top of that paint. Didn't remove it. They painted flabbergasted.
So the question is, are the original petroglyphs, are they graffiti? When you think about when they were created in the context, now we see them as a sacred thing that needs to be preserved as an artifact within history and a thing of importance. But places get lived on over and over and over, you know?
Yeah, and I was reading another artist, and he was talking about the fact that for him, art is transitory, and it should have a life-death cycle.
Yes.
And that, so when I did the painting that I did at Art in the Park, and I deliberately chose to do a reclaimed canvas, I looked at that as the piece that was there originally really inspired me, but I wanted to make sure that my piece of art would also then just be another stage of development of that piece, and perhaps down the road, the piece that I've created, somebody else will add to it, augment it, and change it, because it should be either a continuous development of a story, or just
It's a living thing.
Wow.
exactly. Yes.
And the earth is only so big.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, seasons come and seasons go, right?
But it's hard. And I'm not that kind of art historian, but there are lots that are, that want to see those things preserved. Of course, share.
I just wanted to apologize, because I haven't been feeling well, and I misspoke. When I told the story about the native, although I meant to say Indigenous, and I just realized, it came into my mind that I said the wrong thing, I just wanted to apologize.
Oh.
I meant no disrespect.
No, safe space.
Safe
space.
We're all human.
When you say one word for so many years, and when you don't think about it.
Well, and so there's another thing, right? Now we don't use the same terms
Yes.
that we did at one point. At one point,
I just absolutely no respect. I didn't even, I just suddenly came into my head, I said the wrong word. So.
no, but it's a good conversation, right? I mean, we had a Department of Indian Affairs.
Yes.
To speak about that historically, I still use the word Indian, although I know it's a misnomer.
Yeah.
And that it's
So you
associated
still have
with.
the Indian Act.
Yeah,
All
we do
of
still.
our documents are either Indian or Aboriginal.
But things change over
Things
time.
change.
A lot of slip-ups are, like, it's proven that when the brain, when you're telling your brain, don't say this,
Yeah.
you're more likely to say that. So, a lot of slip-ups are, that you're actually very well-meaning, but that's
Yes,
what it does.
well, yeah, I was
Anyway,
absolutely.
but sometimes you can't win no matter
Okay.
Well,
what,
exactly.
because the brain will just do that.
Yeah.
So when we talk about staying humble, I had my own humbling experience. Some young people in my life go by different pronouns than the ones they might have been born with, which I've got no problem with. As long as I can still call you my darling, I'll call you whatever you'd like me to call you. However, that thing in your brain is like, don't say that, don't say that, don't say, and then it comes out, and you're like, oh man. And this darling said to me, don't worry about it. Like, just try again next time. It's okay. I know that's not what you meant, because I apologize profusely, you know. But I think it's that idea, and it comes up over and over again in the process of reconciliation.
Yeah.
But it's the trying and the good intention that matters.
Absolutely.
And when you know different, you do different.
Yeah, and the whole point of it is to learn and to work towards a better future, an inclusive future with each other. The whole point of Truth and Reconciliation Day is to take a pause and to learn. Listen to Indigenous voices. Don't ask for Indigenous voices to tell you everything in the world. You know, unless you're like giving them some sort of compensation. But you don't want to relive a lot of those things, and there's a lot of information out there. At North Bay for a while was doing, I think they still are, Indigenous host will take over the radio station on that day. And it's, you know, it's a day for non-Indigenous people to learn about Indigenous histories and for Indigenous people to do whatever they need to do to cope, basically. Sometimes there's powwows on that day. Sometimes people just go out into nature, go for a walk, reconnect. For me, most times, I'm out on the land, or I'm with my grandmother, and that's how I spend my Truth and Reconciliation Day. We just talk.
But that being said, there is a powwow on Curtin Lake.
Yes, there is. Yeah. It's also a really good powwow.
So I think that's it for our presentation today, but I
So
mean,
interesting.
thank you for the wonderful conversation. That's really what brings the richness to the program, I think.
I feel bad now because I have a friend that's Cree,